We're going to walk through Sectigo Certificate Managers 21.11. My name is Kristen Santos, Marketing Specialist at Sectigo, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Presenting with us today is Murray McCulligh, Director of Research and Development at Sectigo. Hi, Murray. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you, Kristen.
Great, thanks. Now, before we get started, I'd like to remind attendees that you will remain on mute for the duration of the webinar, which we expect to be around 20 minutes with time for Q&A at the end. You'll be able to submit any questions throughout the webinar using the chat, and again, we'll get to those at the end. We are recording today's webinar, and we'll share that link with you to view to all registrants before the end of the day tomorrow. Now, that's it from me. Murray, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time today to join me in seeing some of the new UI in SCM 21.11. We had a number of goals when we were set out to rework the UI. So one of the major goals was to try to modernize the application, make better use of the screen. So table views were more full screen as opposed to using a partial part of the screen, and to reorganize and rethink some of the navigation to make settings more logical. Currently, I'm showing the dashboard, which is largely unchanged from previous releases. So if you're familiar with SCM, you'll already recognize this screen. We have removed the navigation from the top. So what used to be a series of tabs across the top have now moved to a pretty standard hamburger menu on the left side. The way this is organized is trying to minimize burying settings. In the past, we had an awful lot of options inside settings, and in some cases, multiple levels deep. So we've moved to a flatter navigation structure. Most of these options should be very familiar with you if you've used SCM in the past. Certificates is largely unchanged. Discovery is largely unchanged. We have moved some things out of settings to the top level. So for example, domains and organizations were previously inside settings. We've moved them to the top level of the navigation for quicker access. I'll skip persons for a second and come back to that in a second. Reports is unchanged. We have added a few new sections. So we've added an enrollment section. An enrollment section covers things that were previously known as certificate profiles or enrollment endpoints within settings. So we moved these up to a clearer section and split out the various enrollment endpoints that SCM supports into their separate categories to make it easier to find them and easier to access. We've also added an issuer section. So previously we had some private CA configuration within settings. We've moved this up to its own top level. In this case here, we've added a section that just shows you your available backends. So not all customers have access to all of the various backends that SCM supports. In this example here, I'm showing the public CA backend along with a couple example of the private CAs. Most customers will only have one private CA backend. In this example here, I actually happen to have two. SCM 21.11 does add support for Microsoft CA as a backend, so that would also be something that would appear here. Code signing on demand has not really changed at all. We have created an integration section to group together all of our agents, along with integrations with Azure or Intune, moving these out of settings to make them quicker to access. Which does mean the settings area has shrunk quite a bit. So we still have a number of things here, nothing too surprising. We have moved admins in from the top level into settings. Didn't think it was used or accessed that frequently that it needed a top level in the navigation. And our about section is largely unchanged. It has the same kind of data it previously showed. taking a look at the certificate views, this is one of the major areas we have changed things. So previously, this table would not be full screen. So we've designed this page to make maximum use of vertical space, and we've moved table controls all to a common area on the right. So filtering, refresh, download or export to CSV, and the column selection are all in a consistent area as opposed to spread around in previous pieces of the UI. We do allow bigger rows per page. So in this case here, I can show 50 as an example. Above the table controls are controls for non-selection based actions. So these are things that do not depend on your selection within the table. So we have an upload on some tables. So SSL, we support bulk import, and a plus to create a certificate or whatever the table happens to be. I'll go through those more in a minute. When it comes to selection, all actions related to the selected item are now directly above the table. So you can see in this case here, this issued certificate, you can view, revoke, renew, and replace. Standard actions we had before, but all grouped together. I am going to go a bit through the new certificate viewers. So one of the issues we didn't really like in the old product was that we had one certificate viewer for SSL and we had slightly different ones for every other certificate type. So we have moved to a consistent certificate viewer for all certificate types. Obviously, SCM is focused around managing certificates, so we wanted a very rich and powerful certificate viewer. So the way this is organized, at the top, you can see HTTP node here. That is the common name of this certificate. Beside that are a number of what we call badges that represent information about certificate. So we have a badge that gives the ID. So in this case, SSL ID is 92088. Quick access to IDs can help with troubleshooting with Sectigo, but also when dealing REST API, as the REST API is exclusively dealing with IDs for the most part. We have a badge that deals with the state, largely unchanged from previous releases. So this certificate is in the issued state. And then we have a number of other badges that may appear depending on the certificate type or the status. So in this case here, this certificate was set up for auto install, and we can see it was successful, but it is not scheduled for auto renew. These badges, in case show up for SSL certificates, they wouldn't necessarily appear on other certificate types. There will also be potentially other badges appearing here depending on state. So if the certificate is close to an expiry, a badge will appear that says certificate expires in 13 days, for example. Below that area is a little message or description that changes based on the state of the certificate. So in this case here, the certificate is issued, so it says when the certificate will expire. If the certificate is requested, it will say, you need to approve it. If the certificate has been revoked, it will give information about the revoked date. To the right side, we have some download controls. So all certificates can download in all formats. And we have access to some of the same actions available in the table directly from the certificate itself. The bulk of the certificate viewer is broken into tabs. In this case, there happens to be 4 tabs. In some cases, there might only be 3. There might not be a time span tab in all cases. Depends whether or not the certificate was ordered through Sectigo or was found in a discovery scenario. First tab, details, we cover a section for ownership. So the owning organization or department. Order information if the certificate was ordered through Sectigo. So this section would not appear on discovered certificates, for example. And this provides, the order number, certificate profile, the term that was requested, and who requested it and by what format. So in this case here, it was requested by the Min UI. Plain simple comments are in their own section. A quick certificate summary is shown here. This is not every field within the certificate, but obviously what we feel are the most common and most useful pieces of information. And then any custom fields that may have been applied to the certificate. In this case, I have none. We have added custom fields to code signing certificates in this release, so they are consistent across all certificate types now, and actually are also viewable in the tables. So I didn't really show you the table column selection there, but any custom field can now be shown in the table as well. We have a certificate, or sorry, we have a tab that covers management of the certificate. Again, the sections in here may change depending on certificate type or certificate status. We can enable versus suppress notifications. This has not really changed from previous releases. Auto installation is available if auto renew is turned on. Maybe I want to renew it 30 days ahead of time. You can now see the auto renew has been scheduled. If the certificate has been found in any discovery scans, that kind of information would be shown here. If the private key happens to be in the private key agent or the Sectigo key vault, that information would be shown here. And then if you're doing self-enrollment, the classic passphrase would be available at the last option here. We have a new chain of trust viewer. So on the left side, we're showing the full chain. So an entity certificate on the bottom up to the root with a quick little piece of information about when that certificate expires. You can copy it directly in PEM format to the clipboard or download the certificate in a simple PEM file. Very similar to the top download, but no options here directly just in PEM. Then we have a number of things on the right. So all the fields in the certificate are shown here. All extensions that may be in the certificate are directly viewable, and then properties such as hashes. And finally, dates to deal with the certificate are shown here on the time span. In this release, it's a relatively simplistic view. We do have plans to enhance this with additional data moving forward. So it shows them when the certificate was requested, issued, and expired in this vertical tree format. We'll be adding more here in the future. Before I move on, I did want to show a bit about the SSL Request Wizard. The options have not really changed. Same traditional 4 options depending on what features you have enabled with Sectigo. The order of how details are collected has changed. So previously, the CSR was one of the first things collected, and then we asked for information about organization and profile later. That did cause a number of issues because profiles can control what key types are allowed in the certificate, and that's what's in the CSR. So asking for owner information and thus profile information ahead of time allows us to, warn you if the CSR uploaded is not compatible with this profile. The rest of the settings within this UI are largely unchanged. Previously in SCM, if you'd gone to the client certificate view, what you actually saw was a number of persons and not actual certificates. So it was a view of the persons within the system, and you had to click certificates for each person to find a given certificate. So we have changed that. So client certificate view in SCM is now a flat view of certificates themselves, not related to the person they belong to. So it's easier to find expired certificates or anything you may be looking for directly using filtering or columns. And then obviously you can export as well in a more simplistic way. The old view of seeing a person has just moved down to the persons area. So this is largely unchanged. People are still showing here, and all the actions around persons have largely unchanged. Another area of the UI that has changed fairly dramatically is the domains view. If you're familiar with SCM today, domains underneath settings usually had two tabs. The first tab was a list of domains in a flat view that was basically used to control delegation. So this is where you would add a domain and decide what orgs or departments and what cert types that domain could be used for. And then the second tab was around DCV, and it was a tree view that allowed you to validate what's known as the apex domain or the top level domain within a domain tree. So it's a little different now. So we've moved to showing everything within a tree. So in this case, you can see AA.com and quadruple-A.com are shown in a tree. You'll notice that AAA.com is not shown because that domain has not been added to this system. So we only show domains that are added. We do not fill in levels of a tree in between. On the right side, we have a number of cards that will change depending on your selection within the tree. So in this case here, I've selected AA.com, and the top card on the right is information about this domain. So we can see its name, we can see its ID, and we can see a badge that represents what this is. This is a public domain. So if I happen to go and pick something down here, I guess I haven't, I have a public IP. If I happen to pick a private domain, I don't see one here directly. It would show up as private. There's information about the domain, when it was created, who it was created by, largely unchanged. The description that may have been added to the domain in the past. Obviously, you can edit it. This is also where delegations are performed. So you can see here in this case, AA.com does have some delegations pending that need approval. So a little badge will appear here. Below that card is, the domain validation card. So in this case here, for the Sectigo Public CA backend, you can see that DCV has not been started. Beside that, not validated, there is a refresh button. And so one of the major changes in 21.11 is we now allow a DCV at any level of the tree. It no longer needs to be the apex that is validated. So you can validate any level of a domain. And we can sync domain validation from a backend back into SCM manually. So in this case here, if the validation had been done somehow that SCM did not know about it, it could be manually synced back in here by using the refresh button. I'm just going to move on to one here. So we can see here, in this case, this domain happens to be validated. You can see how it was validated when it expires. And you can see there's now a trash can beside the DCV status. So if you want, you can clear DCV out of SCM at any time. So If I did not want that domain validated anymore, I can remove validation from within SCM. I can also revalidate at any point, so I no longer have to wait until the last 30 days before a domain expires to revalidate it. We can see here we've picked a subdomain to the Apex domain that was validated, and we can see here that validation is actually being inherited from its parent. So in some cases, you can, override that inheritance. Let's say, for example, I wanted to just validate example.apachewebserver.com directly. I can start validation at this level, and that will break the inheritance and continue at that point. You'll notice in our tree on the left, there are a status column. So you'll see a number of domains here that have action required. So in this case here, the DCV has been submitted, but has not yet been completed. So that must be worked on. You'll see domains that are expired. DCV for this domain, for example, has expired. Moving on to organizations, the view has not changed dramatically from previous releases. We have moved access control lists from settings to the organization directly. Previously in settings, we had both the customer and an org level ACL. Customer level ACL is still within settings, but the organization one is moved to the organization viewer. We have used a dialog similar here to the certificate viewer with organization information at the top, along with a number of badges, in this case, the ID and the validated status. We have moved editing of the organization details into a sub-dialog. So you can click the pencil to access those details. Obviously, organization details don't change that often, and this helps to prevent breaking of anchors or anything like that by not having it directly accessible. Certificate settings in previous releases were all on individual tabs. We've moved them into a single tab, and you can access the same options apply here as its previous releases, largely unchanged, just a slightly different format. And one other area I did want to cover today was admins. So we've moved the admins into settings, as I mentioned previously, but we've also redesigned the dialog to control an admin. So this dialog, again, very similar to the previous ones I've shown, has the ID of the admin at the top, whether they're active, has information about them, their name, their email address, all accessible if you need to edit them, but again, not directly in the first level dialog since they don't change that often. We've now separated the configuration from the previous 3 vertical panels to 2 tabs for the most part here. So the first tab, role and privileges, I'll come back to that in a bit in a second, and then an authentication tab. So in this case, you can see the user does not have a client certificate configured, does not have a SAML IDP configured. Since this happens to be myself, there's a UI here that would normally show password change, but that's not allowed for myself in this UI. Changing the password for yourself is done at the top right. The role and privileges, for the most part, is largely the exact same functionality, just organized a little better. So in this case, my overall role is a morale. You can see the individual privileges as previously, but if I can pick, our RAO, then I can say this RAO has access to SSL, and I can pick, which organizations or departments they're responsible for SSL on. So we've simplified and made it a little clearer so you could see quickly what permissions this row has access to and whatnot. So that's kind of it for the overview today. Most of the rest of the UI has been moved to a material design, but it works exactly the same as previously. So other than new DCV and new Microsoft CA backend, the big features of this release is primarily the new UI. So Kristen, I'll pass it back to you. I'm done with my introduction.
Great. We did get one question come through. So in the current system, you can't search for wildcard certs. It brings up all certs for domain.com. Can you now search for wildcard certs?
I do not know the answer off the top of my head. I will have to confirm that. I don't know if we've made any real changes to search capabilities. So this would be a filtering for star dot something. I don't know if I have a certificate with a wildcard in it. Don't believe any of this data has a wildcard.
No problem. We can connect with.
Yeah, I will have to get back to you on that one.
Okay. And actually, we had a couple more questions come through. We access the Sectigo web GUI via secure.sectigo.com. How will I have access to the new GUI?
So SCM would not have been available at secure.sectigo.com. SCM is certmanager.com, or for some customers, it's known as hard.certmanager.com. So I think secure.sectigo.com is a different system than SCM.
Okay, and next question, can we schedule reports of soon to expire SSL certs?
So we have not changed how reporting works in this release. There is plans to change reporting from a manual process to a scheduling based process. That is on the roadmap for next year.
Okay. Next question, are Acme certs included in the dashboard as part of the SSL certificates?
No, they have not changed. That is also on the dashboard or on the roadmap for next year.
Okay.
Acme certs, well, I guess I should clarify that a little bit. So public Acme certs are still marked as external because they're not issued through SCM. Private issued Acme certificates would, because they're issued via SCM. They're done slightly differently due to DCV rules.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying. And in the current CA, we can edit the external requesters, like when an employee leaves the company and you want to replace them with a new person responsible for that cert. And there was a resend button to those new users, the email with all the links to download. Is that still an option in the new UI?
So editing external requesters is still possible. So under management, notifications, I can add external requesters right here. So as far as downloading, all admins who have access to the certificate viewer can download the certificate directly from here. I'm not quite sure. I don't think there was any limitation previously around somebody who's in here being able to download. Maybe I don't quite understand the question.
Right. I'm just giving a little bit of time if there's any follow-up question. Okay, well, if any other questions do come to mind, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. But for now, that's it. And thank you all for attending. Murray, thank you so much for taking us through the latest SEM release. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.